Police Constable Peter Goldsmith was 46 years old, a well-known police officer in the area and a former Royal Commando. He lived in the local village of Stenning, around 8 miles to the northeast of the village of Clapham on the far side of Chanctonbury, with his wife Edith and 2 daughters. On Friday the 2nd of June 1972, he failed to return home and his wife promptly reported him missing. The next morning, when he failed to show up for work at the station, the police launched a full-scale search party consisting of local police, tracker dogs and helicopter. By the 20th of June, with no evidence found, the search operation was ramped up to include over 30 officers, eventually increasing to over 95 officers, 10 dogs, light aircraft, helicopters and a diving unit, and yet still no trace of Peter was found. On the 22nd of September, a police spokesman admitted to the local press that despite following up several leads, they had drawn a blank. At 3 p.m. on the 13th of December 1972, whilst beating for a pheasant shoot on a nearby private farmland, Edward Llewellyn Harris discovered the body of Peter Goldsmith laying underneath a thick patch of brambles. He was lying as if asleep and covered by leaves. In his left hand was a small disc attached to a metal ring, and lying next to the body a small brown bottle which was tested for poison but gave negative results. Due to extensive decomposition, the exact cause of death was impossible to ascertain. However, it was heard at the inquest that his passing had occurred at least 3 months prior to the discovery of his body, and that there were no signs that foul play had occurred. Giving further evidence at the hearing was PC John Grigson, a long-term colleague and friend of Peter, who told of how leading up to his disappearance, Peter had seemed worried recently and was rather quiet and slightly nervous about something. It was also revealed at the inquest that he was last seen at 3:30 p.m. with a brown holdall heading towards the South Downs, and that 6 months prior to his disappearance, Peter had been working as the coroner's officer investigating the death of an unidentified woman's body, which was found just half a mile from where his own body was found. The details of the case, however, do not seem to exist. The final judgment on his death was open verdict and thought to most likely be suicide. Mr. Leon Foster was 66 years old and had been missing for 3 weeks when his body was found in Clapham Wood on the 4th of August 1975. Hugo Healy and his wife had been looking for their missing horse when they came across a pair of legs sticking out from a thicket. Thinking it to be a homeless man, they reported it to the landowner's wife, who contacted police. PCO in Strathmore found the body, as reported, laying on the ground next to what he thought was hay, as if laid out on the ground like a bed. The pathologist on the case was unable to find a cause of death owing to the decomposition of the body, however stated that it appeared he had not eaten or drunk anything for several days prior to his death. The coroner, Dr. Mark Calvert-Lee, unable to ascertain any obvious cause of death, once more ruled an open verdict. Reverend Harry Neil Snelling was 65 years old and lived with his wife in Stenning. He had been the rector of Clapham Patching from 1960 until 1974 and was well known in the local area. On the 31st of October 1978, he had visited the dentist and called his wife to tell her that all had gone well with the appointment and that he would be walking home. When he did not arrive home later that evening, however, his wife reported him missing, and the following day, as with the case of Peter Goldsmith, a full search party was organised, comprising of 25 police officers, tracking dogs and light aircraft. As the days passed and no evidence was returned, local civilians joined in with the search operation, and yet nothing was ever found. 3 years later, in August of 1981, a package arrived at Worthing Police Station containing a letter, a wallet with Harry Neil Snelling's credit card inside, and a rough map with directions to his body. The letter was written by a Canadian hiker named Michael Rain, who apparently had stumbled across the remains of the Reverend whilst out walking, However, he did not have time to report to the police as he was due to fly to Africa the following day and presumably did not want to be held up by an impending investigation. Upon following the map and description, police found the remains of the Reverend 150 yards from the edge of Clapham Wood in a spot they knew to have thoroughly searched during the investigation. At the inquest, his wife positively identified several items found on the remains. The pathologist, Dr. John Shaw, stated that there was no sign of injury to the bones. Due to the lack of evidence, the verdict was recorded as open once again. Julianne Mathews was a 37-year-old divorcee living in Stenning. She had a history of schizophrenia but was generally thought to be coping well in recent times. However, on the 28th of September 1981, she went out to the shops and never returned. 6 weeks later, on Saturday the 14th of November, Alan Budd and Andrew Martin from Clapham were beating on a pheasant shoot when they stumbled across the body of Gillian, laying uncovered on the ground and quite in the open. Investigations found that Julianne Mathews had been raped and strangled, but no further evidence could be found despite combing the surrounding area. On the 25th of November, a police spokesman told local press that it is thought that there are a number of people in the Stenning area who are reluctant to speak directly to the police. A confidential phone line was set up, but no information was ever gleaned and the perpetrator has never been found. Anthony Flowers, the head keeper of the pheasant shoot for that particular piece of land, commented to the police, "Strangely enough, we had been over the exact spot a fortnight before, but had not seen anything." There are some, including Charles Walker and Toyne Newton, the authors and researchers of The Demonic Connection, that believe the Friends of Hecate may well have had a hand in at least some of the mysterious murders of Clapham Wood. It is not without basis either. After his meeting with the initiate in the darkness of the chestnuts, Charles Walker refused to stop his investigation into the occult practices, and rather, armed with a name for the group, intensified his research. In November of 1978, not long after his rendezvous, Charles was riding his pushbike home when he heard a car pull up behind him and begin to follow him at low speed. The car then proceeded to accelerate into the back of him, knocking him off his bike and sped off quickly. Not being deterred easily, when back on his feet, Charles resumed his investigations and later found a mural on the wall of a barn situated near Clapham Wood of a satanic figure. He described it as a huge horned head with a scaly Luciferian body and forked tail, set against a backdrop of vivid flames. Later in the same year, Charles found evidence of a satanic altar in the centre of Chanctonbury Ring. Meanwhile, Toyne Newton had published several articles detailing his own and Charles's research into the area of Clapham Wood and Chanctonbury for the paranormal magazine The Unexplained. The magazine received quite a large amount of correspondence from readers to Newton, and they duly forwarded them on to the author. Most were from readers who wanted to discuss the subject or had questions. However, one was unsigned, typed up on an old typewriter and opened with the harrowing line, "In your article on Clapham Wood, you ask if the mysterious events are linked to a black coven. I can tell you they are, but it is much more than that." The letter could be easily dismissed as a hoax by a reader who is spinning a tale for Newton. However, the very next line dispels the idea almost without question. A few years back, a friend of mine joined them. They are called the Friends of Hecate. Given that Newton had not mentioned the group's name in any of his articles, there could only be one way for the writer to have had the information, and that is through direct contact, either, as they say, a friend, or they were a member themselves. The letter goes on. They meet in the woods and barn up by the church and make ritual sacrifices at the time of Orion and the Archer. Lots of Patching and Clapham people are in it, but the top ones come from London, 2 women and a man. The man is a doctor about 45, the women about 30 and 60. They always go back to London after the meetings, so no one knows who they are or that they are connected with what goes on. I think this is when there is a human sacrifice. My friend said that there are groups the same in Winchester and Avebury, a big group in London. I can't remember them all, but lots of people are involved as there are different grades and thousands of members are in the outer one, but only about 200 at the inner circle. It is all very secret. The inner core members are protected by the others who they use as spies and guards to make sure everything is kept secret. At Clapham there is about 30 members. Who they are I don't know. It is only because my friend has gone to live abroad I can tell you about it. He was sick of it all, especially the sacrifices. He was very frightened when the police were looking for the vicar you mentioned, and when I said I was going to join the search party on the Downs, he said no need, they'd got him. I thought he meant the police had found him, but they hadn't, and when I asked him later on, he told me to shut up. The letter goes on to mention their reasons for using Clapham Wood and about dark forces, and finally signs off. I can't sign my name, but be warned. They are much more powerful than a black coven. In his research, Newton had previously come across a source who had told him about a group of Londoners who had secured exclusive shooting rights on some of the land around Clapham Wood. The source said, "People who have purchased exclusive shooting rights from the privately owned estates come down from London. Big money changes hands and they don't bag many birds. I know because I've seen them." It was Newton's belief that the Friends of Hecate were purchasing the exclusive rights as cover, and cites the fact that 3 of the 4 bodies in the mysterious cases were all found on privately owned land, and 2 by beaters during a private shoot. He also suggests that by owning said rights, they would have a very private and well-guarded venue for holding their ritualistic meetings. Since publishing The Demonic Connection, Charles Walker has continued to investigate the area and has both video and photographic evidence of ritualistic trinkets and incense found around a large beech tree, which is often found with obscure satanic symbols scribed onto the bark in chalk. The wood is apparently now clean of the occult, according to posts made online by Charles Walker. Or maybe not. Reports have once again started to filter through of missing animals in the local papers, and despite the hurricane of 1987, which destroyed the ring of trees that sat on top of Chanctonbury, and which much of the reports of high strangeness centred around, the myths surrounding the area persist, and questions on the mystery of Clapham Wood end up simply requiring more questions. Why did the initiate of the Friends of Hecate contact Charles Walker in the first place? If it was to offer veiled threats concerning his investigations, why did he offer up information so freely in regards to their name and practices? Furthermore, if they made sacrifices at their meetings, and as suggested the animal was what is easy to obtain at the time, why did they have to steal them from dog walkers? Surely there are much easier ways of obtaining domestic animals from breeders and animal shelters that would cause much less suspicion and fuss. Why not just breed them themselves? Still though, the group can't be immediately dismissed. There is little doubt that many of the references made, not only in the name but in the practices, are far and away too obscure for a common prankster, especially in a time before the internet where information was not so easily gleaned on such matters. The letter, as bizarre as it is, can also not be easily explained, as it contains much too much information that could only have been gained by first-hand experience. One of the authors of the book, The Demonic Connection, Toyn Newton, has, it seems, written further publications that detail a supposed occult plot involving the European Union and British sovereignty, which is unfortunate and leads one to roll eyes a little too easily. However, even if we are to disregard the wider conspiracy, there is certainly historical evidence that the occult have, and seemingly will always, be drawn to Clapham and Chanctonbury due to its long and winding history. Posting online, Charles Walker said of Friends of Hecate, "There is a tremendous amount of material that has not been made public as yet and may not be for some time. Investigations in the area are ongoing, and we have in fact made contact with at least 2 people who were, for some years, involved at a low level with the Friends of Hecate." As far as the deaths are concerned, there remain many questions. In the case of Peter Goldsmith, if no foul play had been detected, why on earth would he have gone to the trouble of concealing himself underneath a bramble bush to commit suicide? And how did he do it? Who was the girl whose body had been found 6 months prior, and why is there so little information in regards to any case? There is little to be gleaned from the case of Leon Foster, but the questions surrounding the Reverend Harry Neil Snelling are numerous. If the remains were indeed found where his body originally lay, how had the police and search party, consisting of both a large group of trained officers and civilians alike, not discovered it during the search? Who was the Canadian hiker, and how was he allowed to simply vanish after supplying the police with such sensitive information? And exactly how had the Reverend died in the first place? There seemed little doubt that Julianne Mathews' body was dumped at a much later date due to it being in such an open and obvious spot. But who was the killer, and how was there so little evidence? That the 2 mysteries are indeed connected remains to be seen, but will most likely remain unanswered. The disappearances of the animals and the deaths of the 4 poor victims during the 70s and 80s will likely never be fully resolved and remain a mystery shrouded by the overgrowth in the still uneasy air of Clapham Wood. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and sleep tight. Head over to the Dark Histories website at darkhistories.com for show notes, including maps, links, and full scripts of each episode. You'll also be able to find links to contact me through Twitter at Dark Histories, on Facebook at facebook.com/Dark Histories Podcast. And there's also my email that's available on my website. If you like the episode, I'd really appreciate it if you drop a rating and review in whatever program you use. It goes a really long way to help support the show's growth. And if you can share it around, that would also be great. I should also point out that this episode is actually very local to me, and I've actually visited Chanctonbury Ring on several occasions. Once was when I was probably a little bit more ballsy at a younger age on Halloween night. I did unfortunately, however, find nothing despite running several times around the Chanctonbury Ring. No druid appeared to me. But it has to be said, a weird place. And I can attest, despite being a skeptic myself, I can attest to the fact that it does have something of an atmosphere to it. Anyway, that's this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.